Hello, hello. Just checking in. Dave, can you hear
Yeah,
me?
hey, how you doing?
Doing fine. I'm just checking in because right now it doesn't look like the session has started. Have you? It should be like.
I hit start meeting, but I don't, that's all I did. When I do that, I go into this Blaze, I go into here, but that's it. It just, I click that and it says, I don't know. It says open Zoom, but I'm already in Zoom, right?
Yeah, there should be at the top of the Zoom window you're having. There should be the ability to start the session, start the webinar, something somewhere around there.
Remote control, pause, share, polling, new share, participants. That's video. It said you're in a test mode and it said start the thing. And I said start the thing.
Oh, that's strange. Last couple of hours, Zoom has been acting really weird.
Pause
So
recording. Should I just close it and start it back or something? Or
uh, that's probably not going. Never mind. It has started automatically. That's a good thing. That sometimes happens after 5 or so minutes from beginning. It will just let in people automatically. So people are filing in.
oh, gotcha.
So
Okay, so it did start.
yes. So that's all I think is needed from me. So good luck, and I'm going to join as an attendee.
Oh, great. Okay, yeah. If anybody, I mean, I got the questions up, but if I missed something, maybe you could just chime in.
Yes, I'll be in the chat available for you. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, we're gonna wait for a couple more minutes for more people to come in. We have about 4 right now. See if we can. A bunch of people signed up, so we'll see where we get. But it's 11:05. I don't have a lot of, I mean, 45 minutes is just barely enough time. So I'll wait another few minutes and then we'll get started. Okay, I'm gonna wait for like one more minute and then we're gonna get going. I didn't see, if anybody's on and they feel like taking that poll, that would be really cool. I had a poll there to find out, how do you rate yourself on Meteor testing skill level, whatever. If you want to take that, that would be cool because then I get to see sort of, if everybody's like an expert, I can just jump right to the end. If you're new, then I can adjust accordingly. If you get a moment to do that, that'd be awesome. Okay, so we're going to get started. and then folks will jump in. So I'm going to be talking about testing Blaze and Meteor methods and publications. And just a little about myself. My name's Dave Rollins. I have a little teeny company called 6sense, which is sort of like a toy company. I have a full-time job. I do some stuff with this, but most of it is I do most of my stuff that's not related to my full-time job in Meteor. So I've built a bunch of stuff, and I really like the platform. And one of the things I like is that methods, publications, even Blaze, well, especially React, is very testable. So I just sort of wanted to go through that. So what we'll do is we'll just sort of walk through a few things. So one of the first things is we're going to talk about why do we write tests? What are the different types of tests we can perform? Setting up your project to use tests, running tests, the anatomy of a test file, spies and stubs. If you're not used to that, then that'll be new. And then we're going to go into some Blaze and Meteor and publications and that kind of thing, some testing. Okay. So first off, why do you write tests? Well, I find a lot of times tests are a lot harder to write than the actual code, which is sort of interesting. I've been in situations where I do something really squirrely and you want to test it, and you can be the code takes you maybe half a day to write, but the test could take you a couple of days to figure out. But so like, why go through all the trouble? And maybe that sounds like a stupid question, but I don't think it is, because I think a lot of folks get the idea that tests are really great for automating and the verifying that your code works. It's pretty obvious. I have TDD here. If you don't know what that is, that's test-driven development, which is where you write your tests first, then you write the code that satisfies those tests second. One thing that's nice about tests is they codify your business requirements. So folks have requirements, things got to do this, it's got to jump left, it's got to jump right, it's got to turn something purple, whatever. You can actually codify that in tests and then have your code do the thing. And so you know that, or have high confidence that your requirements are being met. The other one is engineers, if you're used to looking at tests, when they come into a new code base, can get up to speed pretty quickly because they can sort of see what's going on. Aha, I see why you did that. The other huge one is that as you're regularly checking stuff in, you're always running tests. This is all about whack-a-mole. I don't know if you got, if nobody knows what that game is, there's a carnival game where these chipmunks come up and you got to hit them with a hammer, and then another one comes up and you got to hit it with a hammer. And so, I think it's actually called whack-a-mole. But anyway, so if you don't have tests, I always find myself in this situation where it's like, I fix this and it busts that, and I fix that and it busts this. And so I feel like I'm playing whack-a-mole all over the place. So regularly validating your code, like when you check it in, so you make a change, a small change, mind you, because you're not making giant changes, you're making smaller changes and you're iterating into the thing to make your thing emerge and become awesome. And as you're making your changes, as you check stuff in, you're running all the tests. You run that test suite all the freaking time. And if it comes back red, if something's busted, especially if you're on a team, you don't want to be the guy or the gal who breaks the build, if you know what I mean. So not a good thing. So what this all actually comes down to is tests. And this is, I don't know if this is counterintuitive, but really all these other things are sort of like symptoms. To me, the thing about tests is that it allows you to confidently refactor your code base. Anytime you want to go in there and change stuff, you can be really confident that you're not, that whole whack-a-mole thing's not going on. So to me, I just, because I don't know everybody's, if anybody filled out the poll, nobody's filled out the poll. So that's my take on testing. So anyway, so let's go to the next thing here. So the next thing, types of tests, really quick. We got unit, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to be using Mocha because that's sort of like the default version, that test runner version that sort of Meteor points you to. There's also Jest and Jasmine. They're all awesome. Little different syntax, but the stuff you learn today is going to be very transferable. There's also integration tests, not to be confused with, I call them UAT tests, but they're really, some people call them end-to-end tests, which we'll talk about in a second. Integration is all, outside looking in. You write test scripts to test, make sure your APIs are all doing the right thing and stuff. And that's nice because when you're checking things in, when you're smoke testing, like, hey, I just put a whole bunch of stuff into production, I want to make sure that it's sort of, I don't want to go crazy, but I want to sort of make sure at least it's working right. your integration tests sort of come to your rescue. Performance, obviously, about making sure that your app scales. There's a bunch of tools. I got JMeter that I've used. Load Runner, which I know big corps use. Not a super fan of that, but it works great. And then, of course, UAT, or end-to-end testing. There's a whole lot of really good tools here. There's also Nightwatch that I don't have listed here, but Cypress is sort of like a lot of folks used to use Selenium, and then that uses like Phantom J, I don't know, use a WebDriver drive, or whatever it's using. And some of these newer tools sort of escape that, and they're a little nicer to use. Note that React and Vue have great test stories too. I'm not going to get into that because it's so well documented. What's not well documented is sort of like the Meteor core stuff, which is why I'm sort of focusing on Blaze and methods and publications. But React and Vue have amazing, they're awesome test stories. I have links later in the deck, and you can also download this deck because I uploaded it. Okay, so what's next? So setting up your project for tests. So the first thing, I created a project, this test project that I have that I'm going to be playing with today. And the first thing I had to do is I had to install a couple things. The first thing I had to install was Meteor testing Mocha. And so that's like the framework. That installs Mocha. It doesn't install a couple other things I'm going to tell you that you want. I also installed this thing called Johan Brook Publication Collector. And that's the thing I use, and it seems to work pretty well to test publications, and which we'll see that in a minute as well. I also install, in addition to those things, I install these three dependencies down here. I got chai and sign on, chai. So chai is like a expect, it's a syntax by which you write tests. Sign on is your stubbing, mocking, spying tool. And sign on chai sort of, it allows you to write things in sort of an English kind of way that makes it nice to look at. The other thing you should be aware of is that up here, you got some scripts that come along for the ride for your default Meteor setup. Test and test app. Test is all about CI/CD. It runs all your tests once, comes back with a yay, nay. If you had it in your CI/CD pipeline, that's, it would kill it or let it go forward. That's what that's for. Most of the time when I'm developing locally and doing stuff, and I just want to run tests, I use test app, which is basically, think of it as just like when you're running your the application normally, it just runs in a reactive loop. So if you make any changes to test, it runs them all again, which is sort of nice. That's what I'm going to be using today. There's also another test runner that I'm going to show you, which I think is on the next screen here. Yeah. So when you run the test, right, you're going to run npm run test app or whatever. You're going to start seeing stuff like this with Meteor testing Mocha. We'll talk about this in a second. What you see here is you have to go to the browser. We'll show you tests running in the browser. And then also in the back end in your console, you'll see the tests running here. There's also this thing called, I don't even know how to say that, Mocha, which is really just sort of a riff off of Practical Meteor Mocha. There's another one that's written by the guys who did the Redis Op blog, which is similar, just a different color scheme. I use this one. This is sort of nice because everything's in one window in the browser. You see both sides. What this doesn't do, and I'll show you in a second why it's handy to be able to do it, is sort of the only and skip stuff that I'll show you about. This behaves those commands. This doesn't, but you can click on these things, and I'll show this too. You can click on them, and it'll just filter the tests just on that. And the reason why you want to filter tests is sometimes you don't want to run all the tests. You just want to iteratively run this one test you're having a problem with and get it to work right. So that's sort of what you do with that. But anyways, these are two different ways to sort of do your testing. The part where you actually write your test is the same, just how you see it is these two different variations. Okay, so the anatomy of a test file. So here's a test, which we're actually going to go look at in a second for real. But the idea here is that you've got this test, this test file set up. So I got my sign on and my chai, and I got my sign on chai to get my, so I can, this sort of gives you things like to have been called with, which is sort of nice, like that syntax. That's why I use that. There's other ways to do it, but that's what I use. So, this has a describe, which is basically the description of the test. Describes can be nested, and I'll show you what that would look like if you nested them. What's nice is when you nest them, the way your tests come out with how they're reported, they become out hierarchical. So you can, if you have a lot of stuff you're testing, you can sort of manage like what that looks like so you can make sense of things. The before each is something that runs before every single test. So typically every test, I sort of treat every test as its own thing. So that before each sets up the environment for every single test. So it's the same, you know, it basically sets it back to 0, if you want to say it that way. And then after each cleans everything up. You'll notice I'm using this thing called Sandbox with sign-on, which is really handy. Jest has this. I believe Jasmine has the same thing. It's a catch-all. So you use, instead of just doing, so if I didn't use Sandbox, I would do sign-on, Spies, sign-on, stub, and then I'd have to individually restore each one of the things that I set up. The Sandbox will let you just set up like this catch-all, and then you basically put all your stubs and your spies and stuff into the Sandbox, and then you can whack it all at one time after each. The big thing about before each and after each is that if you don't do it right, you're going to get test pollution. And what I mean by that is you'll get, this is, I mean, in a perfect world, before each sets all the tests to like zip, like there's like, it's a clean slate. And after each basically tears everything down. Sometimes you'll find that, hey, this test works, but then when I put it after this test, it doesn't work. That should tell you right away that the test, the order that they're in, there's some test pollution. There's something that's falling into the next test. You're not doing something in the before each and the after each areas. And then of course the it section, right? That's where the test is. And that's, if you go to Jest or other, you know, Jasmine, it may say test instead of it. Mocha went with it because then you could say it should call console log, so you make a little sentence, right? But that's sort of where you're going to put all your code, your test code. And so we're going to jump into this test here. We're going to talk about spies and stubs because you sort of need to understand that before we can get into the other stuff I want to show you. So let's just jump in there. So I got that behind here running, but before we do, my little test app I wrote for this looks like this. It's really stupid. So you can add a new note, you know, blah, 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 save it. You can search, right? You know, it'll search. You can, you know, delete something, yes or no. And then you can, of course, edit, right? So that's what this thing does. This is not rocket science, but it's a, you know, it's a Blaze app. It's still all this reactive stuff, whatever. But you get the idea, right? Something simple, easy to get your mind wrapped around, nothing too complicated. But for the purposes of this thing, I can show off sort of, you know, what's going on with testing. So I'm going to kill this off. Actually, I'm going to leave this going because I'm going to go over here, kill it off this way. And then what I'm going to do is, remember I had the two commands. I had test, which is the CI/CD version, which only runs once and stops. And I had this thing called test app. I'm going to run test app because test app will run all my tests, and it'll run it in like anytime I change something, it'll run again. So that's what I'm going to run. So let's see what this does. What this should do, assuming everything's working properly, should run one test and say, yep, you got your test. And what'll happen is it'll run all my online tests or my UX tests too. As soon as it fires up, I'm going to go like this. I'm going to go like this. I'm going to go like this. And so you'll notice I got my UX tests ran. I got passes of 8, 0 failures. We're going to jump into these in a second, but before we do, let's get into spies and mocks and spies and stuff. So what we have over here, which is sort of cool, is we've got, I'm going to shrink this down a little bit, I think, so we see the whole thing. I guess that's good. We got this really complicated class here that basically wraps console log. And here's the deal. So I've got this thing where I'm spying on logger.log. Now remember, I said sign on is your stub spy thing. And this is really important because if you stub something, what you're saying is, I'm not actually going to do the thing. I'm just going to record that it was called, and sign on will record like all the parameters you gave it. Spies also do that, but spies in addition let the code run. So for instance, sandbox spy on logger.log actually lets the thing run and do the underlying code. If I switch this, and I'm going to do it in a second, if I switch it to stub, this test breaks because this never runs. So I'll show that in a second. But before I do, because we just ran the test, it's passing, life is good. I've got these things called only, okay? The reason why only one test is running, and I think I have like 8 in the back end here, is that I have these onlys on here. You can put only at the describe level, so like just the test suite, the little test file, and only those tests will run when this thing is spinning. Or you can actually choose a specific it and say, I only want that to run. And what it does is Mocha looks at all the tests you have and obeys the only for all tests. So if I have like 700 tests in here, these are the only ones that would run right now if I had it set up like this. If I had another test that also had only on it, it would also run, but only the onlys will run. So if I get rid of this only, we'll get the same thing, because what'll happen is it's only going to run that one test, right? The other thing you can say is you can say skip, right? I can say skip here, and what that does is skips the test. And I think what's going to happen is going to run all the other tests and skip that one. Yeah, so it ran all the other tests and just skipped that one. It's like the reverse of only. So that's something important to know, because a lot of times when you're testing, you just want to run like one test over and over again and just like focus on that one until you get it right. You don't want to see all the, because this could be, sometimes I'll have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tests here. I don't want to see the one freaking test, because otherwise I'm going to lose my mind looking at all that stuff all the time. So just let me focus on one thing. So if I go back and just say only up here, because I really just want to focus on this one test, and get rid of the skip, so it runs. Okay, so we're going to run that again. I'm going to toggle these. Okay, let's see what happens. So I'm going to basically comment this out and uncomment that. So now basically what's happening is I'm stubbing logger.log. And remember, a stub says I'm going to do a thing, but I'm not actually going to do anything underneath it. So this actually should fail. It should tell me that console.log is not being called. Perfect. You'll notice also, and this is something you should be thinking about, sometimes you'll have a whole stack of stuff here. And when you do this expect, you can actually give it a little love note to yourself, right? As part of the spec. You'll notice console log run. Look what it says right here, console log run. What happens if I had console log, I wanted to make sure it got ran. I had about 17 other things, and then I had another console check, and then it ran another 30 things, and I have another console check. It would be nice if I had console ran 1, console ran 2, console ran 3, whatever you want to call it. So I know which one's which. And then when you go here, I mean, you can always go here and click, and it goes right, you just basically right mouse click or click on that, and it goes right to your code. But it's nice to know ahead of time, that's the one that's busted. So then you can iterate, go back, change code, or whatever you have to do, change test code, what have you. Okay. So let's now jump over to Blaze real quick. I want to get that out of the way, because if we run out of time, at least we did the Blaze stuff. So, oh yeah, I gotta fix this again. Okay. So if we go back over, if we go to some Blaze, let's look at a Blaze test. It's a little more interesting. Remember that we have this this list of items. Oh, you'll notice this is empty. What's cool about Meteor, and it's doesn't really get brought up, is that when you're in test mode, your database is a completely different database. It's a test database. So it's not the same one you use when you're normally testing. So no matter what you do here, it's not going to trash your other data, which is like really super cool, because I know about you, but a lot of times I'll have, I log in and my test data, I got things set up. So when I'm testing, because I filled it with data, I mean, I think it would be a disaster if I tested and all that data got whacked. I have to re-enter all that. So your test data is safe. This has got its own database, which is really super cool. That is non-trivial in my mind. That's actually a really super cool feature of Meteor. It just comes along for the ride, like a lot of other things. So let's go look at yeah, let me just fire up a few things here. I want to hang on to some of this stuff. Keep open, and then my note list test. And then here's what I do. I go like this, typically. And what I'll do is I'll grab this guy. I got to get myself out of the way, and I do a split screen. And then what I'll do is, I'll get stuff looking a lot like this. And then so I can sort of see, what's going on the left and what's going on the right. Notice this is just the server stuff that's being tested over here. Remember, over here is all the online stuff. Actually, maybe to make this nicer, we'll go like this. We'll just shrink this up so you can see this. You can see this. We'll scooch this over like something like that. And then we got, so now I've got my test and I got sort of like my back end and my front end for the blaze, right? Thing to think about, how crazy do you want to get testing every single thing on here? It's a question, because what I do, and of course you can do whatever you want, but what I do is there's this thing called making your test too brittle. If I test every single possible thing on the screen, like if I just go absolutely nuts and test everything on here, what's going to happen is every time I touch my code, it's going to break tests. Now, maybe you're wondering, well, isn't that what you want to have happen? Yes and no. Depending on what it is, you may not want that to happen. You might want, and this is how I look at it, a lot of my styling stuff, I want my designer to go in and tweak a couple things without it like crushing my tests. If, for instance, they actually change a class name or they change an ID of a given element, then I get sort of wiggy, because that's a lot of times how I identify what's on the screen at a high level. Or if they change the title of something, right? I'll go after that. But you know, like I don't really go after a lot of the labels and a lot of stuff. I just pick what's important, and I try to be a little bit flexible, because if you tighten the swing set down too tight, you end up, it doesn't flex. It does, you know, you end up with a really bunch of brittle tests. So that's just something to think about. Anyways, so this uses jQuery, right? The way we're doing this, this is Blaze. There's probably a way to do it with DOM, but it's got jQuery, so that's what I use. And what's happening is, you know, this first test, right, just to make sure that the list displays, a couple things are going on here. One, there's this thing called this client test helpers file. Let's go see what that looks like. This is something that's right out of, and I got the link up here, right? It's right out of the Meteor guide, right? It's a Blaze unit testing, and you can hit this link. It goes right there. You'll see something that looks just like this. Note it's using underscore pretty much for this one function right here. If you wanted to get rid of underscore, you just got to figure out another way to just check to make sure that's a string. But other than that, I just use it because it's easy. But you know, you may want something more pure, and that's fine. Just so you know, that does have independencies like that. But anyways, this is how you sort of render the template in a test. And the way you use this is over in this test, we're going to have a test. And remember, look, I got my before each. I set up my stubs. So this thing is a list. So it's going to list all the notes. So I have the notes find. I don't actually want to call notes find. I actually want to return my own version of the data. So I create this thing called a test data file. Now, some folks like to use mocks or a mocking library. Totally cool. I have no problem with that. I prefer this, and here's why. I take this test data thing. If you look at what this test data file, this class, it's like not very complicated, but this gets really big, like on a regular real project. You're gonna have all your types of data that you can return. And what I do is I just have, you know, you have this params thing, you can pass it in. And I set up like, well, this one's using params for count, like how many rows do I want? But like for the detail one, like every single piece of information can be overridden, or I have defaults. And so this allows me to create all sorts of really pointed, very nice fake data whenever I want. And basically what I do is I'll create one of these as I test stuff. I'll create, you know, I want fake this, fake that, fake this. And then by the time I'm done, I've got this awesome test thing that just all my test things are like, I can get at any of the kinds of data. And the way I use that is I'll do this. I'll say, hey, so I'm going to go test data. I want fake notes. I want 5 fake notes, right? So I got this really fancy variable here. And then this is the thing you do a sign on. So remember, up here, what did I do? I stubbed notes find. Now, I'm not going to be hitting the database. I'm not going to be doing anything with the database in this whole test. It doesn't even care about the database. You can delete the database. It's not even going to be used. This thing is really just going, it's all fake data, and I'm in control of the entire enchilada. So the way this works is I have notes.find, and then you can say returns. And you'll see another thing where I have, when it's calling stuff, it does a yields. And I'll show you that when I do Meteor call. You'll see that in a second. But the idea here is that what I'm saying is, yeah, run the notes find thing, but return what I want you to return. You're not going to hit the database. You don't need the database. You're just going to return my fake data. This is cool because then I can make this fake data say whatever I want. I'm in control. This thing is my puppet now. I can go freaking nuts. So what I do is I just give it 5 things. This test is really all about, hey, did 5 things display? Do I have the title? Do I have, I don't know. Again, I tried not to screw the swing set down too tight, but is there a search box? Do I have 5 notes? Is there a search input? Is there, actually, this is interesting. I called things. This would be confusing, right? So this is like the search form, right? Or the add form should not be being seen because that's a reactive thing. When I hit that, if you recall, over here, when I hit this plus sign, I should see a add dialog. It's not here, so I shouldn't see it. So I'm saying should have length of 0. In other words, this command will bring back an array of stuff, and I'm expecting it to have a length of 0, like it doesn't exist. This note item, you'll notice note item. If I go here, I'm going to make this big now because I need more real estate. Sorry about that. When I crank through, I do each note, these note items. Let's see what that looks like. So I have this thing called note item. You'll notice I have a div with a class of note item, right? And what I did was I sort of did some sloppy stuff here. I didn't like make templates for everything. I did it all in line, which is bad for me, but whatever. I'm looking for like node item, and I want to know that there's 5 of them. So I know, okay, great. This thing probably painted correctly. And what I do if I was doing this for real or whatever, I'll have a separate test to make sure when the note item displays, it displays exactly the way it's supposed to display. So I don't have to do it here. I have another test that manages that. And I'll show you how to do a component in a second with the add one. Then what I do is I have some stuff that uses reactivity. Again, I have fake notes 3. I'm going to say, here's my data. I'm going to run it. But then what's happening is I'm saying, that's great. But now what I want you to do is I'm going to hit the add button, which is on the note list screen, that the plus button. That's that note add button. And then what that's going to do, what it does behind the scenes, is it sets a reactive var. Sets a reactive var here that toggles whether you see the list or the add. And so if I didn't have this here, this whole test would fail miserably, because what would happen is that reactivity wouldn't fire. Because remember, you're in a test. It's not like a real thing. So you have to force the reactivity to go. So this is how you do that. So I forced the reactivity to go. And at that time, right, I should no longer see items, because guess what? I've hit the plus sign, all the lists the way I set it up. The list goes away. I should see an add form. I should see a note body. I should see a save and a cancel, and the error message should be blank, because that's because there's an error message there, right? The other one is I want to make sure that when I actually hit save, it actually does the right thing. Now, again, it's not actually going to do anything. I'm just checking to make sure that it calls all the right things the right way, but I'm not actually going to call anything. And the data I'm getting back, again, doesn't exist. It's just fake data. And so what I do here is I say, okay, Meteor call, which above was stubbed. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, so I just created a stub. So now meteor.call is a stub. It doesn't actually do anything. And then again, with sign on, what I do is I set it up such that with args. So I say, when you call Meteor call with the add note arg, I want you to come back, and now this is yields. So the way you think about this is this is basically the callbacks. So there's 2 callback values, error and response. It doesn't matter what you pass back unless you're doing something with it. In this case, I'm not. I just want to know, is there an error? As if there is, I'm going to show an error. Otherwise, it's good. You may have, like, you want to return stuff here. It may be that you want to fake, like, for instance, we could have like, maybe there's a Meteor error that ran, and you want to display it. So you do something like that. And then in your code, because you're doing like, error.reason, or if you want to grab that, or error.error, whatever you normally pick out of errors, you could grab it and do something with it. This case, I want null. I want to say there's no errors, like this add worked perfectly. Again, we're not doing anything. It's not actually calling anything. But check this out. So I sort of, maybe one could argue I don't have to actually test this again, but I am, because I just copy and paste. I click the add button. Look, I got two flushes. Check this out. I click the add button. I set this all up. I use jQuery to set the text area with this fake note. And then I hit the save button. And then I flush, so all the reactivity goes, right? So what should happen after all that reactivity goes? This should toggle, and now it should show notes. And the new note should be at the top, right? But I'm not actually going to show that, because remember, nothing actually happened. I just want to make sure that all the stuff is happening the way it's supposed to. I have a separate test that because I've already tested that if you give it 5 things, it shows 5 things. So I'm good with that. I have a separate test for the method that says when you pass the right stuff into the note add method, it does the right thing. So I don't need to test that, because I have a separate test for that. I just want to make sure that, did I call Meteor call? Yes, I did. Did I call it with the right information? Yes, I did. Remember, I set this to this fake note, and I said add note, this fake note. Made sure it had the right thing in there. And then this keeps on going, right? Because I'm going to jump, we're running out of time, so I'm going to jump over to the next thing. So this keeps on going and says, does it handle the error? In this case, I put a fake error in just to run an error. And then here, it's like I hit save. The form is still there. I have this nice error message it's supposed to have. I did call the Meteor call with the right stuff, but I have an error message. So my error message I show when that happens is this. And so now I know, I'm pretty confident that that works. Really super quick, I'm going to go a little faster here. Note add. So I have a thing that's note add. Let's see what that looks like. It's actually pretty, I didn't need to do that. Let me just close all note. I want to look at note add. So note add is really simple, right? It's very simple form. Note add JS is pretty simple, but it has this callback thing going on here. So from the list, when I display a note add, I give it a callback function. I don't know if you guys have seen that. Hopefully you have. When I do, what's going to happen is that callback function looks like this, and all it does is it sets a reactive var. But I want to be able to test that. So in my add note tests, right? I'm just going to go again quick. I make sure that it displays correctly. You'll notice this is how you pass in that stub. That's the same thing as what's going on over here. See this, that, and this are the same thing. Okay, so I'm passing in a done variable, and here's a stub. And the stub is about as dumb as a stump. Haha. It's just this done stub. It's just a stupid stub. I'm going to pass it in. And I'm going to pass it in because, is it displaying correctly? And then when I add a note, I can check to make sure that done stub was called. That's what I'm doing. I'm just making sure done stub was called. This actually makes the thing go away and I don't have a tracker flush here, because this, once it goes done, the parent template flips the reactive var, and this template goes away. When there's an error, it doesn't, right? So when there's an error, after I hit Command Save, I want to do tracker flush, because I got to make sure that I got the error message and all that. And then I have a cancel to make sure that it does the cancel thing as well. Okay, so that is like super fast on templates. I don't know if anybody's been chatting at all, but yep, okay. So some people are experts, most people are newbies, everybody else is sort of in the middle. Okay. So the other thing is methods, and I'm just going to go through this pretty quick. So this is a note add method. So on my server, I have my method note add. Let's just keep this around. Add note tests. Do the split screen thing again so we can see this. And so what I do, I'm not using validated methods here. I typically just use regular methods, but I test them to death. And so what I do is I have this commented out. I'll show you, because this is all anonymous, right? This whole app. I don't have anybody logging in, but I'll show you how to do that in a second. So again, this is just what I do is I just have this thing called subject. You'll see people do that with tests. It doesn't really matter what you call this thing, but this is sort of how you figure out what method you want to test. And again, yeah, so what happens is I got, I set up the stub. My context is empty. In other words, there's no user, but we'll see if you were to pass in a context and set it up with a user like this and pass it in, then this would actually activate and come back. Yep, I got a user. Otherwise, it's going to fail. So you can actually, that's how you fake passing in a user. I'm not passing in a user at all here because it's anonymous. It would just break everything. So first thing, I'm validating the input. If I give it a not a string, this is not a string, right? What happens? It says no body. Okay. Then the next thing is I give it a blank string, right? Because you say subject.apply. You just don't call it. You got to say apply with the context of nothing. So there's no user. I give it a blank string, and I have this thing that says, hey, you got to be a string. And by the way, you can't be like 0 bytes long, right? So I got a problem. So I said no body is required. No body is required. You see that? And then I actually have a couple things here. One where I run the test. Again, this is back to, it's not going to actually do anything. You're just making sure that your query, your Mongo query or your Mongo insert statement is being done correctly. And so this is how I do that. I check to make sure that that I'm calling the thing, right? So it handles the error, Well, let me do this one first, then we'll go back to the error. Does the insert correctly. So I pass it in a fake note, which is it's a good note, right? And what happens is I'm not getting an error. I'm expecting that notes insert to have been called, because up here, what did I do? I stubbed it. It doesn't actually do anything. I'm just going to record and be able to understand if it was called, and if it was called, what it was called with. So you go down here. I can check to make sure that notes insert was called. And then what I do is I do this args thing. And I say, and this is the first, so 0 is the first, because you could call, theoretically, meteor.call or any function more than once. The first time, this is just 0 indexed. This index here is the time it was called. So the first time it was called, I want the args. And then I do this because it's just easier. You could almost do this in line, but I just find this is easier, especially if you have JSON structures where you want to, and I didn't actually show that, a deep equal. You could say, and I'm just going to do that here because I'll show it to you, but you can do this thing called deep equal. And this would be, this would be some JSON object. And what happens is if it's more than just something simple like that, equal will fail because it doesn't understand it. So you have to use deep equal to understand a really complex JSON object. I'm just using a string, so I'm just using equal. But just so you know, deep equal is your friend when you're trying to validate that the thing passed in was a giant object. And it's supposed to look like this, because what I'll do is I'll say, when I do that, I'll usually do something like expected equals, and it's going to be something, and then I'll do like expected, right? So, and then this could be some ginormous thing that's got all sorts of weird values, and I could have 17 variations of that depending on what I did. It should have a different thing. You can get all sorts of crazy with that, but that validates that thing looked like that. We're not using that here. I'm just going to put that there because I'll check this in to the repo so you can get at it. The note body was equal to fake note. And because it's a date, I'm saying new date here, and I'm not injecting the date. Or the other option I'd have is to create a function that returns dates, and then I could stub that function. That sometimes is you need to do that because maybe you want a very specific date. So it's like, it has to be Christmas on July, on 2023 or something. But in this case, I just care that it's a real date. So I have this is date, Lodash underscore both have this, or create your own function that does this. The idea here is I just want to know, was it a date? Because if it wasn't a date, then I got a problem. And then I'm expecting logger.log not to have been called. See the not, okay? And then I'm expecting some fake ID back. Now, what's with the fake ID? Notice up here, maybe I should space this out so it's easier to look at. I'm saying notes.insert is always going to return. Remember, it's sign on. This is fake. It doesn't even exist. This is all like, everything's my puppet. Notes.insert is going to return a fake ID. Now, normally this wouldn't say this. This would be like, one of those 17 character, random things, the random IDs. It's a test. We don't care. What we care is that this code worked. That's what we care. Do we care whether it came back with a real ID? We don't. What we care is that it did the thing. The code worked the way it's supposed to. Life is good. And then the same thing, I'll go back up to the error. Now I'm going to say the insert throws an error. You see that? So how we had yields, we had returns, we have throws. There's also resolves. There's rejects if there's a promise, right? If you're stubbing a promise, you can also do resolves. So you can say rejects. It's all really, and you can, when you reject, you can pass in whatever you want. Resolve, you can pass in whatever you want, and they'll just come right back, which is really cool. And then so when you throw this fake error, say I got a nice fake error here. I always return from all my methods in general, unless it's something that doesn't apply, a Meteor error, because then I sort of know what the anatomy of the thing is. I might log a real error, but I always return like a Meteor error, and I might actually return part of this error as part of this, but I always like to return Meteor errors because then I sort of, I don't have to interpret the structure of whatever the heck's coming back. I know it's the same thing over and over again. That's just my thing. But so I'm saying it's going to blow up. So when this calls, it's going to blow up. It's going to now I'm exercising this code, right? So I'm saying, okay, I called it with the right stuff, and then I should have logged the fake error. I should have logged the fake error. Oh, this is interesting. Don't skip this part. I used to get burnt all the time. It's like, wait a second, it wasn't called with that error. And then you're looking for why wasn't it called? Guess what? It was never called. So anytime I check to see if I want to know if the values is something that was called, the first thing I always do is I make sure it was called, just because I know it sounds silly, but you can sit here and I've spent like 45 minutes trying to figure out why it wasn't called with the right stuff. And lo and behold, it was never called. I know that sounds stupid. Believe me, it'll happen. So always check to make sure, if it wasn't called, then you're like, that just saves you so much time. You can go, okay, why the heck is the thing isn't being called? That's different. Oh, it's being called, but it wasn't called with the right stuff. Much better place, right? And then I'm expecting the message, right, that comes back on the error. Because remember, the other thing I do is I do all my methods in an async await, because it makes this flatter. Otherwise, I have a callback and it's messy. I just always do it this way. Notice I don't have async here at all. It just works. At least that's my experience. I just always do async await, and I can do try catch, and it flattens the whole thing and makes your life easy. Let's jump over to publications, because I know any second the giant hook is going to come out and pull me off the side here. We're going to hang on to this guy so he doesn't go away. So I have this really complicated thing. So what do we want to do with this? One, we want to make sure that search is a string. Otherwise, I'm just going to return like, nothing ever happened. I'm not going to blow up. What's the point? I'm just not going to do anything interesting. And then if you do get in here, I want to make sure that it's valid, right? So, I've actually done this code the right way. And I want to make sure that when I do run this code, it actually does the right thing. This one, I'm actually, because it's a publication, but again, I'm totally controlling what data is being played around with. And remember, Meteor, right, sets up a separate test database that's not going to trash your normal database. totally cool. You'll see in a second, it's like super cool. What you do, at least what I've been doing, and if somebody has a better way to do this, all ears, but this is what I do. I'm using this publication collector thing that I mentioned at the beginning. So this Johann Brook publication collector. And I have the syntax here if you want to pass it in a user context. That's how you do that. So then you could say, if this user ID is blank, then sorry, I can't help you because you're not authenticated. But that's how you would that's how you fake that out. Again, this thing's completely anonymous, so I'm not using that. So what I do is I create the publication collector, and then what I do is I loop through it. I'm actually adding data to the notes. I'm actually inserting data, and I just create fake data. It's like whatever you want to do. By the way, what I really should be doing here, and I didn't really think about it, is I should be using my test data.fake note, right? To populate this every time, and then pass in as a parameter what I want the note to be. So I missed the opportunity to do that for you guys. I'll clean it up, and then when I check this back in the repo, I'll make sure it does that just because I can. But then what I do is I remember all the IDs. And then I run now this is I'm passing in nothing. Okay, I'm expecting an error, and it should come back and say, I should get nothing back, right? I'm not going to get an error per se, but it's not this notes.find was never called up here. Notes.find. Notes.find, I'm spying on it. Remember spy stub? Stub doesn't call, spy does, but it still gives you all the reporting capabilities. I spy on it because I want to know whether it was called or not, but I do want to actually call it. Okay. So what I do is I say, down wherever the heck I was, here, that it was actually called. Or excuse me, it was not called, right? Then I say, well, it should return all the notes. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm passing in just an empty string. So remember, all notes, empty string, right? For this, all notes, empty string, right? It should come back. I'm setting this up with 3 notes, note 1, note 2, note 3. It should come back just like this. You can get as anal as you want with this, depending on what you're doing. I just happen to do it this way. Sometimes I just check to make sure that a couple of them are right, but it depends on what you're doing. And I make sure that notes find was called. And by the way, it was called with all the right stuff. You see this? And then the opposite is true, or the addition is true. I want to filter the notes. So this thing just creates note 1, note 2, note 3, or 0, 1, and 2. So when I put a 2 in, based on my regex, what am I expecting? I'm expecting back one thing, right? So what I'm going to do is I put the 2 in. I shouldn't have any errors, whatever, but I should get, right? I should get just one thing in my collection that comes back. And I'm expecting its body to be note 2. And I'm validating that I called my notes find correctly. So I have confidence that this thing works the way it's supposed to. I might have missed something. There might be some kind of value you can jam in here that string doesn't catch that screws up regex. If I discover that, then I would just put a check in here to make sure I stop that. But I think this is okay. There might be something I'm missing, but in general, okay. So that's that. So that's all I had to show today. So let's go back to this thing. So I think this wraps it up. Blaze, Meteor methods, publications. This is the whoops. Yeah, here's the. Didn't mean to do that, but now that I did, it's actually I designed it that way. Here's the project I have out here. I'm going to update it with a couple of things I said. But yeah, you can go play with this. All this stuff is in here. Went over this stuff. I just included a bunch of other links to stuff. This is stuff maybe, this is well documented for React testing and Vue testing and Mocha alternatives. You can go check it out. A lot of folks use this for pure React stuff. It's actually just as awesome. Jest is cool because you don't have to install Chai, sign on, or anything else. It's Jest. It does the whole 9 yards. It's a one-stop shop. It's pretty cool. Jasmine, a lot of folks use that. Excuse me, with Angular, I know. JMeter I've used a lot in the past for performance testing, but there's other tools you can go search for. And of course, Cypress is cool, and I know a lot of folks use Nightwatch, or folks, there's some documentation out there in the forums about folks using Nightwatch. But that was that. I don't have anything else to share. I don't see any questions. Oh, in Safari, yeah, it does work in Safari. Somebody, okay, yeah. So, yeah, I don't know if anybody has any other questions, but that's what I had to share today. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed that, or at least it was something. Maybe you learned something. I don't know, but that's what I have. And this is Baxter State Park, which is really pretty up in Maine. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It's absolutely gorgeous. And that's that. So if nobody has any questions, I think I will sign off. Unless somebody has a question. Let me see. Okay, yeah, we're good. Thank you, you guys. Really enjoyed talking at you. Bye-bye.